بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. صدق الله العظيم. If someone can close the door, inshallah. Jazakumullah. Tell me a few of the virtues of Umar radiallahu anhu. Preferably the children or the kids, inshallah. Yes. He was strong. How about this? You guys should volunteer before I start to pick you. You know, those days were the most feared. When the teacher would say, tell me the answer. He'll leave it general. Just tell me the answer. And all of us, me and my classmates, just look down. Make sure, don't make any eye contact. He was strong. He was also tall. And anyone? Yes? He loved the deen of Allah. Yes, my sister?
He has the wisdom to figure out right from wrong.
Yes, mashallah. He had that ability, alhamdulillah, given by Allah to distinguish between haqq and batil. Anything else?
He was the muhaddith of the ummah.
MashaAllah. Anyone else? What's the hadith I mentioned about Umar radiallahu anh? The Prophet of Allah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned about him. I'll mention the Arabic, you mention the translation. لو كان بعدي نبيا لكان عمر. Sounds loud enough, please, so that others can also recall it. Should I give you the mic? I don't think the cord goes all the way. So if there was a prophet after me, it would have been Umar. Tell me of some of the ayats, or at least one that was revealed by the assumption or by the desire of Umar radiallahu anh. We covered some.
Is about to cancel the wine.
Okay, the prohibition of wine. What else? I'm sorry? Hijab. That also. Who else? Police? Okay, so he founded that department as well. Any other ayah? وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَبَدًا. Yes, munafiqeen. About praying salatul janazah of the munafiqeen. Okay, inshallah. Umar radiallahu anh, the taqwa that he had within himself, the level of piety. Once Umar radiallahu anh, he drank milk and it tasted very sweet. And after drinking, he asked the one who gave him the milk, where did you get this from? So the individual mentioned that we had milked some of the camels that were chosen, or that were the camels of zakah. So Umar radiallahu anh, upon hearing this, right away, he put his fingers into the mouth and vomited out the milk, and thought and said to himself that how could I, being the leader of the believers, drink from the milk that had come from the camels of zakah? It's not me. Another occasion, Umar radiallahu anh, and subhanallah, we find this so often within the lives of the Sahaba, even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, about borrowing money. And sometimes, living in this age, we think it's bad to borrow money. It's just wrong. It's morally unacceptable. No, we have found that throughout the lives of the companions, it was an action that the Sahaba uplifted and uptook. But the only thing that they were more concerned about was making sure to return the money within that due time frame. So Umar radiallahu anh, he asked Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anh to allow him to borrow 4,000 dirham. 4,000 dirham he wanted to borrow. So Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he sent the message back by the messenger and he said, tell Umar radiallahu anh to take it from Baytul Mal, which was more or less the treasury department reserved for the believing men and women. Take it from there and I will give it back to him. I will give it to him eventually. So let him take it from there for now, because the Umar radiallahu anh wanted to invest that money within a caravan that was going to Sham, a business trip. So Umar radiallahu anh, when he heard what Abdurrahman had to say, he mentioned, no, if that's the case, leave it be. Because Abdurrahman has promised to give me the 4,000 eventually. But what if, say, I take the 4,000 from Baytul Mal, I invest it before the returns of the wealth, before it reaches back to me, I may have passed away. And if I die, you people will sit down together and say, you know what, he was Amir al-Mu'mineen, he was Umar, we forgive him. What about Allah? What will Allah have to say to me if I have not made that return back to the owner? So therefore leave it be. That was more or less Umar radiallahu ta'ala and how concerned he was in regards to his affairs and his daily activity. Umar radiallahu ta'ala, it's mentioned within a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet of Allah, he saw within his dream a palace in Jannah. And he saw that there was a woman besides the palace making ablution, wudu. And he found this palace to be very beautiful. He asked the woman, whose palace is this? She mentioned, it is Umar radiallahu anhu's palace. Prophet of Allah initially thought of entering into the palace, but when he found out that this palace belongs to Umar, he recalled Umar and his anger and his personality, and he shied away and did not enter into the palace. Then he told Umar radiallahu anh afterwards about this dream, and Umar radiallahu anh mentioned, O Prophet of Allah, how can you ever expect that I will be upset at you? You could have done as you liked. How can you think that I will be upset at you out of all people? So this was also something that indicated towards Umar radiallahu ta'ala and his abode in Jannah. As you know, Umar radiallahu ta'ala, he was appointed to be the Caliph or the Khalifa after Abu Bakr radiallahu anh by Abu Bakr radiallahu anh himself. So we'll come to know as we cover the stories of the Sahaba, the selection of the next leader. But as for Umar radiallahu ta'ala, he was selected by Abu Bakr radiallahu anh himself before he had passed away. And at time of doing so, the people, the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they looked at Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, they said, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, how can you do this to us? Don't you know the harshness and how strict Umar is? How can you leave him to be a leader over us after you pass away? Don't you know how harsh he is? You know how strong and strict he is upon the matters of Allah? Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala mentioned, the khilafah, the burden of the khilafah will make him soft, will soften him. So there's nothing to worry about. That the burden of the khilafah will soften him. So do not worry. And that's how Umar radiallahu ta'ala had become the Khalifa of the believing men and women. Umar radiallahu ta'ala himself, he was the one who had also buried Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala. There were many things that Umar radiallahu ta'ala contributed towards the Muslim framework from that time up until today. And amongst the few that I'll list inshallah, number one, he founded more or less the treasury department for the believing men and women, known as Baytul Mal. He had also founded the judiciary system where he himself would appoint judges and the court system. So having a place for people of the victims or those who had whether any blame or accusation towards anyone or a case to present forth, they would know where to go, which court to attend to, which judge to present their cases before. So Umar radiallahu ta'ala introduced that as well. He also introduced something which is known as what calendar? Hijri calendar. The calendar of Hijrah. There's some story behind that as well, but inshallah we'll leave it to be. He was also the first person who was known as Amirul Mu'mineen. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala was the Khalifa. But when it had come to the time frame of Umar radiallahu anh being the leader, he would be addressed as Amirul Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers. He, Umar radiallahu ta'ala, had also situated or allowed for people to reside within certain cities so that the city itself can become populated. Otherwise, people would all choose to just live within one certain area. So it was through his foresight that many cities had become populated. Another thing that Umar radiallahu ta'ala an had made during his time was he built rest areas for the travelers who would travel from Makkah to Medina and Medina to Makkah. Rest areas for them to come by and just simply rest and spend however much time they need to rejuvenate and to become fresh again to carry on their journey. He, Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, also built the registry system of having names listed, and then also the welfare system as to the children, and he stipulated a certain income for each child that would be born within a Muslim household. Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, he was also the one who gathered all of the Sahaba together in his timeline during his Khilafah in the month of Ramadan, and made what? Brought what forth? Salatul Taraweeh. Before the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala, you had groups of people leading one another for Salatul Taraweeh. But in the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala, Umar radiallahu an, he chose one of the best qurra, those who were able to recite the Quran beautifully, appointed him to be the Imam, and asked that rather than you 3-4 people in that corner, a few people in this corner and that, all of you come together behind this one qari. So from that moment onwards, subhanallah, you have that sunnah of Salatul Taraweeh. Also, so sunnah, again, it was the Taraweeh was established during the timeline of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It came into that form of one selective jama'ah during the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala an. Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, also he appointed salaries for those who used to call out the adhan and for the imam, those who would lead the prayers. Before his time, there wasn't that. So it was in the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, if you were a muadhin of a certain masjid, the salary was due for you on behalf of Baytul Mal, as well as the payroll of the imam. It was during the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala an that he started to illuminate the masajid of Allah, whether it through different forms of light or candles, but he made them well illuminated. This is some of the things that Umar radiallahu ta'ala an had brought forth before the community of the Muslims. Also, another honor that Umar radiallahu ta'ala an was given and was blessed with was he was the father-in-law of who? Subhanallah. May you live a healthy life, my sister. Full of iman, inshallah. He was the father-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Who was he married to? Who was the daughter of Umar radiallahu? Let the brothers answer. Hafsa radiallahu anha. So subhanallah, he had that honor of being the father-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala also had that honor of being the father-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. I'll leave this to you. Should I mention to you the story of how Hafsa got married to a Prophet of Allah, or leave it be?
You can explain.
Yes? Okay, inshallah. Or we can leave it for the story of Hafsa radiallahu anha. Okay, so quickly, inshallah, the story of Hafsa radiallahu ta'ala anha, her proposal and how it went. She was married and her husband passed away after some time. And when the husband passed away, Umar radiallahu ta'ala an wanted to get his daughter married. She had become a widow. So he approached Uthman radiallahu an and proposed that, would you consider marrying my daughter Hafsa? Uthman radiallahu an remained silent and moved along. Next day, Umar radiallahu an came back to Uthman radiallahu an, have you given it a thought? He said, I'm not ready for it. I'm not ready, I'll pass. So he then went to Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an and proposed that, would you consider in marrying my daughter Hafsa? So as I'm covering this story, it is the father who is going around asking that, would you consider marrying my daughter? In our times, we find that, quite blameworthy. We find that it's blemishing. We find it staining to my honor. How can I present my daughter before someone? Subhanallah, you're doing it for a nikah, to complete her faith. There is honor in that. Umar radiallahu anh is doing the same. He goes before Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, would you consider marrying my daughter? He remained silent. Umar radiallahu anh mentioned, I got so upset at Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, more upset at him than Uthman radiallahu anh. And then the next day, it so happened that it was Prophet of Allah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam who proposed for Hafsa. And then Abu Bakr radiallahu anh came before Umar. He said radiallahu anh, he said, "Oh Umar, you probably were upset at me when you asked and you proposed to give your daughter in my hand, but I remained silent because Prophet of Allah had discussed with me beforehand about wedding or marrying Hafsa. So I wanted to keep that as a secret until Prophet of Allah himself would disclose and request you if it would be possible or not. So I wanted to keep that as a secret of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam." Once Prophet of Allah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had the hand of Umar radiallahu anh within his hand, and they were in a crowd of the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Umar radiallahu anh, just think about it, his hand in the hand of Prophet of Allah. So out of joy and love, what sight. He said, "O Prophet of Allah, there's nothing in this world that I would prefer over you except myself. I love myself, and after me it's you, no one else." Prophet of Allah mentioned, "Oh Umar, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِي, I swear by Allah in whose hand lies my soul, you cannot attain piety or the level of iman until you start to love me more than even yourself." So Umar radiallahu anh mentions, "O Prophet of Allah, if that's the case, I love you more than my own self." Then Prophet of Allah mentioned, "Al-an ya Umar, now we are talking, Umar. That's it. Now you've completed your faith. Now you've come to that conclusion that you cannot be a complete Muslim or a mu'min until you love me more than everyone else, even your own self." So right when Umar radiallahu anh heard that, he mentioned, "I do so." So then Prophet of Allah mentioned, "Al-an ya Umar, now that's what I was looking and hoping for." So this is Umar radiallahu ta'ala anh. Now as he had started to serve the community, the Muslim community, local and abroad, he had become more or less a model as to how in serving the people. Not only did he address the concerns of the residents of Medina, but far abroad, Misr, Yemen, wherever it be, he would make sure to address, as all of the lectures would come back to Umar radiallahu ta'ala an regarding the affairs of the people abroad. One of the letters had come to Umar radiallahu ta'ala an regarding which river? The Nile River. And the name of the companion, Amr ibn al-As, if I'm not mistaken, radiallahu ta'ala an. It was Amr ibn al-As radiallahu ta'ala an. He sent a letter to Umar radiallahu an mentioning the scenario of the Nile River, that how it acts on its own will, and what the culture and the trend is of the area. When they conquered the land, the Sahaba conquered the land, they came to know that the locals of the area would from time to time, within a certain time of the year, they would sacrifice, throw one of their own young girls, made sure that she was young, beautiful, a virgin, and throw her into the river, and then the river would start to flow. If they would not do that within that time frame, the river would not flow. The water would become less and less. So it had become a pattern of that area of vicinity. And people knew that if we don't do this, it won't happen. So when the Sahaba conquered the land, they came to know that this is what the people do. Amr ibn al-As radiallahu ta'ala, he mentioned to the chief of the land, the area, that look, we do not accept or believe in this. In fact, Islam has come to erase all such practices that have such, ignorant practices within themselves. So we do not believe this. So he sent a letter to Umar radiallahu ta'ala explaining this is what happens to the Nile River. Umar radiallahu ta'ala, he wrote a letter back, and he's told Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anh that I want you to throw this letter within the river. So when Amr ibn al-As received the letter, he opened it and it read, Min Amir al-Mu'mineen, from the leader of the believers, a servant of Allah. This letter is from Umar to the Nile River. If you, O river, if you flow by your own free will, then stop. Then stop. But if you flow with the will of Al-Wahid al-Qahhar, referring to Allah, the one and only, the mighty one, if you flow by His will, then continue to flow. We ask you by Al-Wahid al-Qahhar, that's continue to flow. So he threw that letter in. By morning, the river had become overflown. And now, understand one thing. Many of the stories will come across of Umar radiallahu ta'ala an that to us, subhanallah, we need iman to understand them. Otherwise, they may be difficult to digest. What? A letter and then the river started to flow? Remember, the verse of the Quran, everything within the heavens and the earth, it glorifies Allah. It praises Allah. There's another narration, what used to happen, that some of the shayateen and jinn, they used to block the water. And as the practice had become more common, the shayateen and jinn would participate in making sure that yes, they would sacrifice one of their girls, and once they do so, they will think, okay, because we did so now, the water starts to flow. So Umar radiallahu ta'ala dealt with that issue by throwing that letter within the river. Subhanallah, if you think, there's a problem, my wall is leaking, and you go right on the wall, that if you're leaking because of your own free will, your iman, it will come down to your iman. Really, the Sahaba believed in what they believed in. That was them. That with such belief, it will flow. If it doesn't, then it's because of your own will. We don't need you. But if you flow with the will of Allah, then start to flow. And it did. This is Umar radiallahu ta'ala. There's so much that, inshallah, we'll cover, that you'll think, wow, were the Sahaba human? How could they do such? How could they perform such extraordinary feat? How could they? It's the beauty and the power of iman that we have yet to tap into. So, Umar radiallahu ta'ala, that was one of the incidents. Another incident, Umar radiallahu ta'ala, once he was visiting Sham. He was with Abu Ubaidah radiallahu an. And right before arriving into the city of Sham, there was a stream had come in between. Umar radiallahu an was mounted upon his camel. When he saw the stream, he came off the camel, took off his shoes, put it over his shoulders, took the rope of the camel and jumped straight into the stream and started to pass the stream. Abu Ubaidah radiallahu ta'ala an, he was there, he saw what Umar radiallahu an did. He said, "Oh Umar, you're Amir al-Mu'mineen. I wouldn't want the people, the residents of Sham, to see their leader in this state. You've got shoes on your shoulder, you're carrying this camel by the rope, all wet. It's not a pleasing sight, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen. Please, what did you do?" So Umar radiallahu ta'ala, he mentioned to Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh, he said, "Had I heard these words from anyone else, I would have punished them, I would have made them an example for the believers. How can you say this, oh Abu Ubaidah? We were people of disgrace and humiliation. We were disgraced people across the globe, over the land, and then Allah elevated us, gave us status and rank through Islam. And then when we have Islam with us, we're given that rank of Islam. You want me to disregard that? Oh Abu Ubaidah, if we as Muslim, if we try to find status and rank, respect besides Islam, then Allah will disgrace us. This is our principle. That this is, as Muslims, this is the standard Allah has set for us. If you try to gain acknowledgement, if you try to gain status, whatever it be, from behalf of outside of Islam, not through Islam, but through other means, then Allah will disgrace you. This is what Umar radiallahu ta'ala mentioned. And because of his such, acts of humility and how simple-minded and noble he was, once he was upon the minbar delivering a khutbah. All of a sudden in the middle of khutbah he says, "Oh Umar, what about the time that you used to graze the goats? You would take a flock of sheep and go outside into the outskirts of the city and tend to the goats all day long, oh Umar." Some of the Sahaba mentioned, Amir al-Mu'mineen, you were giving such a khutbah and then in between you interrupted everything and you start to degrade yourself. Why would you do that? Umar radiallahu anhu, he mentioned, because as I was delivering the sermon, a thought crossed my mind. My nafs told me, "Look at you, oh Umar. Today you're the leader of all the believers. There's no one above you." So I thought I wanted to teach a lesson to my nafs. What do you think of yourself? Oh Umar, your reality was that. Allah has elevated you, so know your position. So I thought that I will degrade myself in front of all, in front of everyone, so that my nafs can taste who I really was. Just as a reminder. And subhanallah, let's look at our lives. The moment we're given some status or some say, it's me. No, I'm sorry. You want to speak to me? Come at my time. I'm being sarcastic, but this is our problem. Where is the humility? Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was walking with men of Quraysh, and along came an elderly woman, and she saw Umar, she had a cane, she saw Umar, she singled him out, and he was the Amir al-Mu'mineen, she singled him out. And then as she singled him out, she started talking to him, and Umar radiallahu anhu, he bent down and rested his ear next to her, and kept listening. Time passed, however many minutes, it passed, and the men are waiting. And after she completed what she had to say, she was done, then Umar came back to the men of Quraysh and the other Sahaba, and they said, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, you kept the men of Quraysh waiting for an elderly woman. You're somewhere else. Your position that Allah has granted you. He mentioned, what's wrong with you? Don't you know who she is? She is the one that when she complained, her complaint went to the seventh heaven to Allah. قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا وَتَشْتَكِي إِلَى اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ يَسْمَعُ تَحَاوُرَكُمَا. What was her name? Khawla bint Tha'laba radiallahu anha, if I remember correctly. And then he mentions that if she kept me until nightfall, I would have stayed there. This is the humility that Umar radiallahu ta'ala showed to the people of his time. And when other outside forces that had ill intention for the kingdom of the believing men and women, when they came into Medina and saw the state of Umar, they knew we can never conquer them. If the leader is like this, I don't know how the other guys will be like. If he lives a lifestyle of such simplicity and humility, how can we ever triumph over them? So more or less, Umar radiallahu ta'ala had given that message to Abu Ubaidah, that this is our way. If we seek respect and status besides Islam, Allah will disgrace us. Allah will humiliate us. Another occasion, Umar radiallahu ta'ala he came before Ali radiallahu ta'ala. He mentioned to Ali, he said, oh Abu Hassan, oh the father of Hassan, there were many occasions that we were present in the gathering of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and you were not. And many times you were present and we were not. But there are three questions that have been, constantly been going through my mind. I've been seeking and searching for their answers. If you happen to know them, please tell me what the answers of these three are. The first, oh Ali, I ask you that why is it that a man sometimes he loves a person even though he does not see something of good within him immediately? Like you love a man, you love a person, there's no real reason for you to love him, but you still love him. And sometimes you distance yourself from a person whereas there's no real reason for you to distance yourself. Why is that? So Ali radiallahu ta'ala, he mentioned, yes, I heard Prophet of Allah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mention that in the world of the souls that actually went around and got to know each other, they would continue that relationship even in the world. But the souls that remained separate and distant from one another in that world, in this world they remain the same. So Umar radiallahu anhu mentions, okay. Second question, he mentions that why is it that when sometimes a person speaks, he forgets and then he remembers? So from time to time you forget what you're saying and then it comes back to you. Why is that? So Ali radiallahu ta'ala, he mentions that I also remember Prophet of Allah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioning that just as how there are clouds that overlap or come in front of the moon, just as how sometimes the clouds come in front of the moon and because of it the light of the moon becomes darkened, there's no more light, and then the clouds move on and the light shines once again. Likewise, sometimes there are clouds, figuratively, that come in front of a man and he forgets what he was saying. And when the clouds move forward, meaning distractions, that when they move forward, he remembers once again as to what he was saying. He mentions, okay. Third question. Why is it that some dreams are true and some are not? Why? How is that some dreams happen to be true and some are not? Ali radiallahu ta'ala, he mentions, I also heard Prophet of Allah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioning that when a person falls deep into sleep, his soul travels. And the soul that goes up to the arsh of Allah, if it happens to reach there, the dreams of that individual will become true. But if it happens to awaken before it reaches the arsh of Allah, then his dreams will be false. They would have no grounds, no standing, nothing behind supporting it. Umar radiallahu ta'ala, he mentions, I was seeking for these answers for a very long time, and alhamdulillah I found them before I passed away, before I died. Once, I'll end shortly inshallah. A Jew had come before Umar radiallahu anh, and he mentioned, "Oh Umar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَجَنَّةٍ عَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ," about paradise, about Jannah, that it is such that the width of it is the grounds and the heavens all together. Just the width of it. So if the width of Jannah is the grounds and the heavens, the earth and the sky, then where does Jahannam go? So if Jannah, the width of it, forget the length, how lengthy and vast it be. Just if the width is as-samawat and ard combined together, then where does Jahannam go? So Umar radiallahu ta'ala, he looked at the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned, can anyone answer to that question? The Sahaba remained silent. And then he said to the Jew, he mentioned that, tell me, so he mentioned, wherever Allah wants. Wherever Allah wants. In fact, Umar radiallahu ta'ala, he asked the Jew, he said, tell me, when the night falls on the land, where does the day go? When the night falls on the land, where does the day go? So the Jew mentioned, wherever Allah wants. He mentioned, fine then, Jahannam goes wherever Allah wants also. You have the answer to the night and day, so then fine, Jahannam also goes wherever Allah wants. So the Jew mentioned, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِي, again, I swear by Allah, in whose hand lies my soul. The same answer has been given in the Torah. Oh Umar, the same answer has been given in Torah. You also will come to know, in fact, you'll know now, that Umar radiallahu ta'ala was amongst the very few companions who actually knew how to read and write. He knew how to read and write. Whereas a lot of the other Sahaba, including Prophet of Allah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did not know that. That was the miracle of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that without knowing how to read and write, yet he brought forth the Quran that people could not refute or dispute. They had to accept it. They had to accept it. Had Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a teacher, people would have said, it was because of the teacher was so sharp-minded. He was such a genius that his student would turn out to be like that. Prophet of Allah had no teacher. His teacher was Rabbul Alameen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why when the Quran came forth, people had to accept it. We knew him to be as an ummi, as the unlettered prophet. What is this that he's bringing forth? It cannot be but the revelation of Allah. So inshallah, one last short brief dialogue between Umar radiallahu ta'ala and one of the Bedouins. A Bedouin came before Umar radiallahu ta'ala and this was the behavior of the people, that you want to speak to the leader of the time, snatch him right, just take him. Every person had access to the leader of the time. So this Bedouin comes before Umar radiallahu ta'ala and he mentions, "Oh Umar, al-khayru khayrul jannah." The only good is the good of Jannah. The only joy is to be found in Jannah. Besides that, nothing really matters. But oh Umar, I ask you that you give me clothing for my wife and my daughters. And I give you the oath of Allah, you better do so. He said this to Umar, you better do so, oh Umar. So Umar radiallahu anhu, he says, what if I don't? What if I don't? He says, then if you don't, then you will be asked about me in front of Allah on the day of Qiyamah. And you'll be left in a shock, you'll be awestruck. Well, then you'll either be driven to Jahannam or Jannah, oh Umar. So Umar radiallahu ta'ala right away, he starts to cry. And he tells his assistant, he takes off his upper garment, his qamis, he says, give this to him, for I have nothing else to give. I have nothing else to give, so just let him have this. There's so much more to mention, inshallah. In the next session, I'll devote more of the time just to the stories of Umar radiallahu ta'ala an that relate to him and his, trips, or more of the steps he would take during the night in making sure what the situation of the residents is. So he'll roam the streets of Medina, and there are so many incidents found within the books of history that he came across this house and he heard this happening, and this is how Umar radiallahu ta'ala responded. He came across this person and this person was doing this is how he responded. There's so many more of those incidents, inshallah, that we'll cover in the next session. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the right understanding of his deen. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ سُبْحَانَكَ اللَّهُمَّ وَبِحَمْدِكَ أَشْهَدُ أَن لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنْتَ أَسْتَغْفِرُكَ وَأَتُوبُ إِلَيْكَ